My name's Forrest, and let's talk about the evolution and complexities of food sharing, shall we?
Give me that.
My food?
I'm joking.
Food. We all gotta eat. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, amongst our peers during lunch hour at school and work, around a table during the holidays with our loved ones, on a street corner at 4 a.m. with your friends next to the hot dog stand that charged you $25 for a meal you know really only cost about $3 to make. It is understood without having to say that food is the main component that determines whether any living species will survive and thrive or just survive in general. As all living things eat their organic matter of choice to absorb the nutrients they need to continue existing, one specific species has a cute little behavioral trait known as food sharing that extends sharing food beyond mothers and their kin, sharing food with total genetic strangers, a rare trait to find in the animal kingdom. Who is that freak of a little species that relies on altruism, empathy, tolerance, and social cohesion? Us humans. All living things have to feed on organic matter in their environment in order to survive. And by eating organic matter, living things receive nutrients that keep their bodies sustainable. Nutrients like carbon sources, vitamins, minerals, and nitrogen sources, to name a few. Microorganisms, which are brainless, single-celled organisms, naturally only eat for themselves with no concern or thought, really, considering they have no brains, of feeding their young. They eat decaying plant and animal material. Few can even utilize non-traditional food sources like plastics and heavy metals. Bigger-brained organisms, whose brains still lean on the smaller side of the scale, like insects, amphibians, reptiles, and fish, are mainly, if not only, concerned with their own feeding. They don't really worry about their young, and of course there are exceptions in this category, but most don't care about their offspring like that. Once an egg hatches, it's kind of a fend for yourself type of situation. However, with bigger brain species like birds and mammals, we start seeing the dominant parent figure more often than not, the mother, start taking care of their kin, providing their young with protection, shelter, and most importantly, food. This puts us in the same category as big cats, bears, elephants, and the great apes. However, humans aren't special for sharing their food with their kin, but what makes us special is our unique proclivity to share food with people outside of our genetic family. This practice is seen across every culture around the world, but it's what makes us stand out from every other living species we've come in contact with. Zane Swanson describes food sharing as, quote, central to the evolution of the human species itself. If we look at our closest human relative, the great apes, they don't share food the same way we do. Orangutans are mainly solitary animals, with their kin staying with them for about 7 to 9 years. Chimpanzees and bonobos do share amongst each other, but both apes share as a sole form of delayed reciprocity as opposed to sharing as a form of generosity. You also have to consider how we are anatomically different than our hairy cousins, beyond the naked eye, of course. The main difference being our large brains. We have larger brains than the rest of the primates. This means that our babies are naturally bigger, making our childhoods longer due to the brain needing more time to fully develop, giving us a longer lifespan, which inherently increases the time in which we are fertile. Our bigger brains and longer lives make us more susceptible to falling short of our caloric intake faster because of the amount of metabolic energy we burn, meaning we have a higher metabolic rate, making our sheer existence pretty dangerous because we have a really high chance at starving, which is actually insane if you think about it. The fact that we were sharing high quality food amongst everyone in our intergenerational and interfamilial community made all the difference for the development of the human brain. Raising a child to become a healthy, fully developed adult is what I can imagine as a childless adult, very difficult. Yeah, it looks hard raising kids. If we didn't have help or have communal help with raising children at a crucial point of our human evolution, our high fertility rate and massive dome of a brain would be unsustainable. These big brains and long lives made food sharing, as Swanson puts it, a quote, key socio-ecological characteristic that helped facilitate the evolution and co-evolution of many of the behavioral, physiological, and psychological adaptations that have come to define the human species today, unquote. When and why did we start sharing food with each other? Because there's no way that we just started doing that, right? We started sharing food way before we started cultivating crops. Food sharing started with hunting and gathering, hominins' number one strategy for collecting food. Today, there are still communities that are accustomed to this lifestyle, like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Achi of Paraguay. These tribes actually help us understand how our early human ancestors utilized this sourcing method and how it played a part in their social dynamics. Hunter-gatherers can be traced back to 2 million years ago in Africa via our human ancestor Homo erectus, the first hominins to be bipedal, making them the first hominins to be built for long distance walking. Their nomadic ways led our lineage to venture out of Africa and stumble into Asia and Europe. Although they were nomadic in nature, there is evidence of hunter-gatherers scattered all around the world. For example, simple tools were found that date back to the Stone Age, like hand axes, which actually is proof that hunting really meant scavenging or hunting down small game because of how small the tools were, at least when it came to Homo erectus. Hearths have also been found that date back to 800,000 years ago. There is also potentially, that's a key word here, potentially, evidence of fire from early Homo erectus sites in Kubifora in Kenya, but researchers have said that that could just be evidence of a wildfire. So there's that. But if it was a hearth, that's really impressive. But again, that's potential evidence. So don't hold your breath so much for that. Fire was a massive step for our human evolution. Fire was used as a way to ward off potential predators, to cook, and obviously to stay warm. Groups of people gathered around these hearths that either they built or that another group built and were using. They shared in the protection and the warmth the flames provided, making hearths a communal experience. This was essentially a precursor to the emergence of communities and societal groups. However, we don't know exactly how these groups formed, but since people started gathering together around these fires, we can assume that they figured something along the lines of, hey, that person has a little fire. They look kind of warm. I want to be warm, so I'm going to go sit next to them. And it kind of looks like they have some nuts and 2 bars over there. And I have nuts and 2 bars, my own. But you know what? If I don't have nuts and 2 bars tomorrow, hopefully they share with me. So to ensure that they share with me, if I ever don't have nuts and 2 bars, maybe I'll share some of my nuts and 2 bars with them. Because nuts and 2 bars can go around the circle. You know, nuts and 2 bars are essentially like the s'more of our early human ancestor, I imagine. Anyways. And like, as cool as hunting might sound to some people, maybe, I don't really know, hunter-gatherers really were dependent on the gathering side of things. They shared a variety of nutrient-dense food like roots, 2 bars, and nuts. And since gathering was less risky and more common than hunting, we did gain intricate knowledge of edible plant life and their growth cycles that were then passed down from generation to generation. However, one thing that is very clear is that our ancestors understood that they needed to work together at some capacity in order to survive. Through simple observation of the outside world, it is evident that solidarity is a concept that is widely understood by every community worldwide. And we recognize that we needed to cooperate with one another since our hunter-gathering days. Leda Cosmides used evolutionary principles to develop the computational theory that acknowledges that humans at an early stage of our evolution had the brain power to navigate and determine what would be the best way to go about certain situations, similar to a computer. So it's safe to assume that it is a common human experience for 2 or more individuals to be put in a situation where the best thing to do would be collaborate with the person next to them. Charles got that hat on Darwin also writes in great length about cooperation and mutual aid, recognizing that a society that cooperates and looks out for each other is going to thrive way above and individualistic society. And our early human ancestors understood this at some capacity. Their brains were like really good at cognitive motoring, and they had the ability to calculate social exchanges and understand the pros and cons of situations. German medical anthropologist Wolf Schievenhoven talks about this in his research article on the human ethology of food sharing, recognizing that, quote, sharing resources like paying taxes and getting involved in unpaid voluntary work, etc., unquote, are, quote, altruistic acts of solidarity. Even though today we are born and/or find our way naturally into specific social groups, be by race, class, sexuality, gender, etc., humans have always had a very interesting way of creating our own little unit. We compartmentalize and form groups that in today's modern age has grown outside of the basis of categories that were previously mentioned. We've gone so far as to sort ourselves out into continents, countries, states, counties, cities, neighborhoods, sport teams. I'm sure people can add more. And okay, I'm not ignoring the colonization of it all. Many modern day countries are a product of colonization and genocide. And wow, colonization is a conversation for every day. It's not what we are talking about right at this exact moment. But I promise we'll get to that. It's coming. It's coming. I digress. For example, I'm from California, lived in both Southern California and Northern California. Everyone here knows that there is a significant difference between NorCal and SoCal. Despite that, though, we all still represent California. If someone from the East Coast tries to say something about California, yeah, NorCal and SoCal are riding together, okay? You can't talk shit on us like that. You can't. And I know not everyone agrees with the place that they're from, you know? It's like that one scene in that one movie. I think The Last Black Man in San Francisco.
You don't get to hate it unless you love it.
Where he's like, you can't hate something unless you love it. So you can't say, you know, you hate California unless you're from California and you love it. New Yorkers, I'm sure you can relate to this. I've only been once, but each borough has its own history, culture, community, legacy. And even though it's all one city, they all have different accents too. Again, even a girl like me who's lived on the West Coast her whole life can tell the difference between a Brooklyn, Harlem, Bronx, and Manhattan accent, which in the grand scheme of things, I really shouldn't be able to do that, but I can. And in the same breath, even though each borough might talk shit about the other one, if anyone's gonna talk shit about New York, it's not gonna be somebody that doesn't live in New York. And let's take it one step further. Look how quickly every American came together on TikTok to tell the British exactly why they wouldn't win a 100 versus 100 with us. I've honestly never felt so patriotic in my entire life. I hope you don't hold that against me, but that's another example of how united we become just because of our proximity to a place and our connection to a place as well. All these examples just to say we form these villages and find solidarity within these tribes we have created that are made up of people that are within our direct proximity. We want the tribe to thrive and survive because that means that we are thriving and surviving. It is somewhat a reflection of us, and there is a connection our ego has to the area we are living in, down to the street we live on. Although people may look and be different within our modern tribes, there is still a want to see the people around us live well because that means we're living well, or at least, like, you know, I don't know. That's how you'd hope someone felt towards their fellow townsmen. But I don't know. But there are specific characteristics and traits that we look for when considering whether we should let someone in our group or community, because not everyone can be welcomed into each group, and not for homophobic or racist or classist reasons. Our early human hunter-gatherer ancestors just knew that you couldn't trust everyone. That's the golden rule, stranger danger. In Schievenhoven's paper, he references economist Robert Frank's understanding of this behavior that influenced the evolutionary side of our early human ancestors' economy through Frank's book, Passion Within Reason. Schulverhoeven explains Frank's theory, quote, that our ancestors preferred to interact also economically, strategically with those who acted generously and honestly and did not hide their emotions behind the facade of a poker face. Hence our basically honest emotional signaling via facial expression. Individuals with this kind of mental and psychic setup, honesty, and generosity would have been preferred by the others. They would have, therefore, had more success, better partners, and more children who would statistically carry that same kind of characteristics like their generous parent. Unquote. Our early human ancestors sought after people that displayed honesty and generosity naturally, which in turn would make them more honest and generous towards that person. It's crazy how it literally just took authenticity, realness, and kindness that made us not only share, but want to share with someone who shared with us. And I don't want to word this in like the wrong way. I really don't. But it appears as though it wasn't the lack of ownership of food that made our ancestors share with one another, but a sense of having a transparent, real, and authentic relationship with these genetic strangers next to them that made them inclined to share. And that's nutty. That's honestly very sweet. Like, what a sweet little deal. Hey, just be real and I'll share some food with you. Okay. And I don't know, be a little generous too. That's crazy. That's all we want. Schulverhoeven says, quote, the quest for and concept of ownership is intrinsically connected to the possibility sharing. The two form an evolutionary bracket which can hardly be forced apart. If an infant does not feel and thereby knows that a certain object is mine, she/he cannot share it in a meaningful way. If everything belongs to everyone, the act of giving is a meaningless transfer, but not a heartwarming, socially powerful transaction in the Musinian sense. Schulverhoeven also feels like the everything belongs to everyone mindset and political and economic systems like communism that follow that concept aren't realistic for the current state of the human psyche. He believes that we can't help but feel like things belong to us because that is how our psyche has evolved up until this point. We can do our best at attempting to change it, but our innate way of being sees things as ours, even if it doesn't have our name on it. But that's what makes it like so special, you know, that we make conscious decisions to not be selfish for the betterment of our fellow human, or for like at least one of 5 reasons someone would consider sharing food outside of their family. And we're getting to that right now. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe, who studied the Hadza of Tanzania and wrote about it in his book, The Hadza Hunter-Gatherers of Tanzania, has identified 5 reasons why hunter-gatherers, and essentially us, would share with others. In Chapter 9, Cooperation in Food Sharing, in Marlowe's book, Marlowe speaks of 5 food sharing hypotheses. 1, nepotism. 2, mate provisioning. 3, reciprocity, not in kind exchange and in kind exchange / delayed reciprocity. 4, costly signaling. And 5, tolerated scrounging. Hunting and gathering was a huge stepping stone in our evolutionary history for the human lineage. It allowed us to develop behavioral adaptations like food sharing and cooperation to give us the ability to progress. That's why when agriculture officially came on the scene 14,500 years ago, it was a huge game changer for humans. But like, humans were already going through the necessary cultural changes that led them to agriculture about 19,000 years ago. We were developing behavioral traits and tendencies that really made it easier for us to transition into agriculture. And we weren't doing this consciously. You know, it wasn't like someone was like, hey, I think we should, I don't know, maybe start sharing with each other because in about like 5,000 years, we might start planting seeds in the ground and like caring for it. It wasn't like one day someone was like, let's do agriculture. That's not how it works. In the words of Nicki Minaj,
you gotta prep them for shit like that. They can't just get that shit right off the top.
This is what a cornfield looks like, honey.
agriculture was like A huge deal. It gave people an excess of food that they themselves cultivated. For the first time, there was a surplus of product and really no need for a lot of people to help with the food production. It didn't take everyone in the community to help with the gathering of food like hunting and gathering did. This allowed for divisions of labor to be created, meaning that people could branch out into other specializations of labor like artisans, merchants, traders, craftsmen, scribes, warriors, priests, etc. Agriculture literally was the second predecessor to the complex societies humans have today, with the first being complex hunter-gatherers. By the way, complex hunter-gatherers, unlike the immediate return hunter-gatherers who we've been kind of talking about this entire time, aren't nomadic in nature. They often stayed in one location for a specific food supply, usually a protein source, like staying in a specific area in the forest because there is an influx of deer. Since there is a reliable protein source on top of vegetation, there really was no need to leave the area. So they kind of had their own little towns and villages in a sense. It is widely believed that farming started in the Fertile Crescent in the Levantine region. This would be in what is modern day northern Egypt. It then went through Palestine, Israel, Jordan, and Syria, making its way to the Persian Gulf. This region was viewed as the crossroads between Africa and the rest of the world. The Epi-Paleolithic Foragers and Azraq Project, or the EFAP, worked on archaeological digs in this area. The EFAP is made up of a group of archaeologists and bioarchaeologists that were led by University of Cambridge's Dr. J. Stock, Dr. Lisa Marr of UC Berkeley, and Dr. Tobias Richter of the University of Copenhagen. The EFAP found evidence that suggests that agriculture could have started 19,000 years ago, opposed to the originally thought 14,500 years ago. There is solid evidence of agriculture existing during the Natufian period, but there have been findings that suggest that complex hunter-gatherers had been building transient campsites since about 19,000 years ago. These campsites that were found in this region covers almost 2 hectares, specifically in the Karanen Forest site in the Azraq Desert on the eastern side of the Jordan. The EFAP excavated archaeological remains of the hunter-gatherers who lived in the Azraq Basin and the marshlands of Jordan. And mind you, this is not an easy place to work. First of all, archaeology is hard because you're in a ditch dealing with very fragile, very old things that you want to try and preserve. Add that onto, being located in a windy desert with temperatures that go up to 45 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that's 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather is so intense that their days have to start at 5 in the morning so that they can escape the heat by midday because of how unbearable the wind and heat make it. But before the Azraq Basin was the 12,000 square kilometer area of desert it is today, when humans first left Africa, the Fertile Crescent, like Africa, was a lush marshland that contained open grasslands with gazelles, antelopes, and plant life. This area is believed to have been a spot where hunter-gatherers from different locations would meet and live for several months out of the year. They would then split into mobile groups for the remainder of the year. Evidence like, quote, plant remains, animal bones carved with repeated incised motifs, stones carved with geometric patterns, stone tools in their thousands, hearths, pierced shells, and just recently oval hut structures, unquote, have all been found 3 meters deep into the ground. The manipulation of these organic material make it clear that there was advanced cultural and technological complexities in these hunter-gatherer camps. These hunter-gatherers can be labeled as complex hunter-gatherers as opposed to immediate return hunter-gatherers. Complex burial sites are also proof that hunter-gatherers started settling in specific areas prior to the Natufian period. This points to these hunter-gatherers having elaborate mortuary and socio-cultural practices. For example, a burial that was found in the Karanen Forest site points to the remains belonging to an older man who would have required care from others in order to survive. Another site, the Yun al-Ham site, had 11 burials excavated. The findings suggest that there was, quote, elaborate mortuary treatment of the bodies before being buried. One grave even had a human being buried along alongside a fox, which suggests there was, quote, a close emotional or symbolic tie between humans and foxes prior to the first domesticated animal, the dog. The EFAP researchers correlate this to an increase in, quote, cultural sophistication and greater complexities in the relationship between humans and animals. So basically, we are finding evidence of empathy and social bonds way earlier than we previously have thought. Our early human ancestors had a big enough brain to have the want, need, desire, and wherewithal to feel and have empathy for not just other humans, but for other living things in general, which meant that they wanted to take care of these other living things, despite those living things potentially not being able to reciprocate these actions. Also, in order to do this, you need to care about these things at some capacity. Not only is there a social bond there, but there's emotional ties and relationships that we are witnessing right there just from this evidence that has been collected. These behavior adaptations essentially were a precursor to farming villages. Some hunter-gatherer groups were swapping out their nomadic lifestyle for settlements that had reliable food sources and food supply. At this point, crops and animals could be farmed, meeting the demands of each specific location. Mind you, agriculture was naturally discovered 5 different times in different parts of the world independently. These are just different social organizations that all shared the same huge moment in their cultural evolution. And it happened spontaneously. That's crazy. That's so cool. Think of all the different crops that have been domesticated in every country and how long those crops have been around. Also, like how good grains and veggies and fruits are for you that have been around for like ever. Syria grew the ancient grain cereal as long as 9,000 years ago. This grain included freekeh and emmer that were roasted and rubbed in durum wheat to make not only a delicious product, but a product that was high in fiber, micronutrients, and proteins. Earlier than that, we have found prehistoric fruit from the Jordan Valley, specifically fig trees. Fig trees are believed to have been planted 11,300 years ago. Rice and millet even date back to China during the Neolithic period. The oldest rice paddy field dates back to 7,700 BP in eastern China in the province of Xinjiang. There's also proof that by that point, the Chinese already had what they considered back then to be ancient cultivation techniques, which included flood and fire control. What we know as present-day Mexico started cultivating squash around 10,000 years ago. An early ancestor of maize or corn, known as teostent, had been cultivated for the past 9,000 years at least. But the corn on the cob we know today is a product of natural genetic mutation that dates back to only around 5,000 years ago. And corn didn't just stay in Mexico. Corn made its way from Central America to North America, where indigenous folks were growing sunflower seeds 5,000 years ago. Around that same time, corn also made its way down to the South American Andes region, where they were growing potatoes. And the Fertile Crescent, where it all started to domesticate cattle, goats, sheep, and pigs. And genetic studies have even found that Europeans actually had to have a genetic mutation happen for lactose tolerance prior to the domestication of cattle settling in Europe. But now 90% of Northern Europeans, like the Swedish, are descendants of cow herders, making their digestive system tolerant of dairy today. We even have a lot of lost crops, which were wild plants that were domesticated and cultivated that are no longer grown today. I found this really interesting article on the evolution of seeds and plants that I won't be talking about because this video is already like long, but I will link the article below because it's really cool, but just a little off topic for this video. Anyways, the desire for settlements and access to food made civilizations grow. Obviously, our human population really boomed around 10,000 years ago when there were only 5 million people on Earth. But today there are 8 billion. Now that we live in state-based societies that revolve around agriculture and technological production, the next question is, how did food sharing become more complex, and what were the effects of these complexities? And the answer is like kind of simple if you think about it. It really just stems from social hierarchies that came from complex hunter-gatherers and the rise of agriculture. Okay, so let's talk about that. In order to understand how food sharing became so complex, it starts with us understanding who the main players of the conversation are. When a group of people claim land or choose to stick to one area, like agricultural-based societies or complex hunter-gatherers, naturally, they start drifting into similar political hierarchies due to the surplus of food that is available. Author Christopher Ryan breaks this down in his book, Civilized to Death. Now that there is an abundance of resources that is collectively recognized as high value to not only you, but those around you on this plot of land, it kind of changes the game. This land that has so many resources is now, Ryan quotes it as, something you're willing to risk your life to defend and something someone is willing to risk their life to plunder. On the other hand, immediate return hunter-gatherers didn't believe that they had any resources that they necessarily needed to defend. Christopher Ryan describes it on Dr. James Cook's podcast perfectly.
So it's a very different kind of approach to life. It's interesting that these immediate return hunter-gatherers, we would look at them and say they have nothing. And yet their approach to life is built around an assumption of abundance. Whereas, we look at ourselves and we say we have everything. We have so much food, so much technological wealth, and yet we live as if there's an assumption of scarcity. It's one of the central conundrums, I think, of human life.
So basically, immediate return hunter-gatherers don't see the need to acquire anything and everything all at once, when everything is right there whenever they need it. In Dr. Cook's podcast, Ryan also mentions Marshall Saling's paper, The Original Affluent Society, which questions why we view hunter-gatherers as poor with their lack of abundance, when if you look at their quality of life in comparison to ours, they are significantly happier than us when it comes to things that aren't just material resources. If you value leisure time, value a sense of community, if you care about your nutrition or care about having a sense of meaning in life, or if you're seeking, freedom from violence or freedom from systematic oppression, then yeah, you might think that hunter-gatherers got it figured out. But have they ever held a Nintendo Switch 2 and played the free roaming Mario Kart? It doesn't make me feel good that I just said that. It doesn't. Would I trade peace for a Nintendo Switch 2? Their abundance mindset has led them to lead healthy lives, while our scarcity mindset, on the other hand, the scarcity mindset does come from the idea that we need to stockpile, that we need to hoard the resources that we have, because what if those resources depleted? And this is a relatively rational fear that humans still face today. Christopher Ryan does relate it to what happened in Turkey before it was known as Turkey. The area was in a period that was a reflection of the Garden of Eden because of its bountiful food source. During this period, they started building megalithic statues. Culture started being created. But then the climate turned on them. They went from having an abundance of food to lacking resources that once were available when needed. So naturally, they began to cultivate to ensure that they wouldn't run out of food, because they had an area that they needed to preserve, because they built something that mattered to them. There were families, structures, art, culture that they made, and they wanted to make sure that it stayed there for them and for their children and for the people after them. It starts what Dr. Cook calls the agriculture trap. And he calls it the agriculture trap because once we began farming, there was really no going back. Now you need more land, which leads to violence because you have something to protect. It starts to change your relationship to the people around you, especially because somebody does want to claim the food as theirs. Whoever owns the food is at the top of the social and political hierarchy now. It guides us down this trap where there is always people who don't have enough, and there are always people who have way too much. Usually the people that have too much are the people at the top, and they are the ones controlling the narrative. But in immediate return hunter-gatherer societies, the worst thing you can do is hoard food and not distribute it equally. Literally. It's basically a death sentence because it could expel you from the group, and joining a new group wasn't like super easy to do, you know? And if you decide to be greedy and stingy and not share, you'd be left out on the outs. And then you're just left by yourself in nature, no help and no resources because you chose to be greedy and selfish, and that doesn't slide in hunter-gatherer groups. I read it in The Lost City of Z by David Gran that it's understood by archaeologists that go on excavations in dense rainforest environments like the Amazon that the first person to steal or hoard food is most likely the first person who would be willing to unalive. Oh, God, I hate saying that. It would be the first person to unalive someone. Again, food is the central premise of any living thing's survival. The minute someone starts to exhibit selfish tendencies in an environment that requires cooperation, that requires thinking of the group, the minute one person starts acting selfish, they are now viewed as the disease of the group. And usually, you want to cut a disease out. But before you try cutting a disease out, you do make an attempt to treat it a little bit. A lot of times in our hunter-gatherer history, they do just that. Our ancestors developed anti-hierarchical behaviors to keep people's natural ego impulse in check for the betterment of the group. They would belittle the hunt that someone caught, no matter how big and meaty it was. If they noticed that someone's ego was inflating, elders and shaman would pull that person aside to let them know that we all depend on each other, not just one person. And then if the point wasn't being heard, then that person might have had a terrible hunting accident. That's how you work that one. But I mean, humans are hierarchical beings like the rest of the primates. But in immediate return hunter-gatherer societies, people were selected as a leader because they were well respected. If someone has a lot of power, it's because their advice is valuable. And not one person led the entire group. They recognized that everyone had different valuable advice for different things. If one person like stood up in front of everyone and was like, hey, I'm the leader now, listen to me, they'd be viewed as the lame that they are. That's the easiest way to put it. The agriculturalist versus the hunter-gatherer mindset is basically the fear versus love mindset, scarcity versus abundance, as Ryan puts it. When you lead with a scarcity mindset, according to Ryan, it turns into, quote, lunacy and paranoia, unquote, because there is never enough. Disease and weaker health can even be linked to agriculture and the scarcity mindset. In pre-agriculture Turkey, the remains of men were on average 5'9", and the average woman was about 5'5". However, when post-agriculture remains were observed, men on average were 5'6", and women were 5 foot across. Weston Price also did research on the dental hygiene of different people from around the world and noticed that the Western diet was directly responsible for the huge collapse of human dental health. Even evidence of teeth from skeletal remains show that decay happens in post-agriculture society in comparison to pre-agriculture society, who had healthier teeth. And I want to reiterate, this is about hunter-gatherer and agriculture, not colonizer versus colonized. White people were hunter-gatherers. Brown people did live in densely populated city centers. These are social systems we are talking about. But we all started the same way. We used to live within the environment, but we started to control our environment instead of working alongside it. We got lost in our fear-based mindset, and that is still impacting us today. All because of something that we started 14,500 years ago, but started developing 19,000 years ago. That's crazy. It's still impacting us. And I mean, capitalism and colonization did drill a deeper hole of this fear-based mindset into our modern society today that has made it pretty hard for us to crawl out of that hole. I told you we'd come back to colonization. I told you, because it always comes back to colonization. scarcity mindset, while unavoidable on a global scale at this point, is being perpetuated by the people in power today. We're constantly told that there just isn't enough food for everyone to go around. It's just a harsh reality of life that some people are just gonna have to starve. But we need to ask ourselves, why are people starving, and do they need to? We can see how food insecurity is affecting folks who endure poverty worldwide. Countries that are suffering from the hunger crisis at high levels are usually facing food insecurity because of political conflicts, displacements due to war, as well as climate crisis. Places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, the Sahel, Sudan, Somalia, Northern Ethiopia, Haiti, Ukraine, and Palestine are all currently being affected by the evils of political conflict and the unrest that has led to millions of people going hungry. Civilians who had no political ties in these wars other than living in their home country that is getting invaded are having their food supplies limited by their aggressor. These folks are being treated as though their existence is a direct political threat to the same people that are violently antagonizing them. When political powers are withholding food aid to places like Palestine and Ukraine, on top of using excessive lethal force to displace these people, you have no choice but to recognize it for what it is: genocide. And I believe 2 weeks ago, from the point that I'm recording, Israel actually destroyed the seed bank in Gaza. And mind you, limiting civilian access to food during war is literally a war crime. Like, it is in the International Humanitarian Law, the IHRL, under the Rome Statutes of 1998. And that's not even the only wartime law that prohibits using food as a method of warfare, which you can see in its predecessors, the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights from 1966, the Additional Protocol 1 from 1977, and the newest one, Resolution 2417, that was created in 2018. Not only do we have people in countries that are facing war on their home front going hungry because of certain governments' psychotic need to take land and carry out genocide, but people in places that don't have a shortage of food are being impacted heavily by the scarcity mindset as well. Food deserts, a base term coined in the early 1990s by a resident of a public sector housing scheme in the west of Scotland, refers to an area whose residences have limited access to grocery stores that carry fresh food. Restrictions of fresh fruits and vegetables makes maintaining a healthy lifestyle for these residences near impossible. A lack of nutritious food directly impacts people's overall health. However, the definition of food desert has expanded since the 1990s. According to PBS SoCal, food deserts can also mean that the area has a lack of, one, financial access, meaning that stores in the areas are priced out of what the average residents can afford. I've been told, though, that that closely relates more to what is considered a food mirage. But the second definition is mental attitudes, meaning the consumer simply doesn't have the knowledge of what's good or bad for them. However, grassroots food activist Karen Washington has said that food desert is an outdated term, and what we need to start calling it is a food apartheid. In Nina Sevilla's article for NRDC, Washington states, quote, "Number one, people will tell you that they do have food. Number two, people in the hood have never used that term. When we're talking about these places, there is so much life and vibrancy and potential. Using that word runs the risk of preventing us from seeing all of those things," unquote. Leader of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law and Graduate School, Lori Branovan, had a similar critique in Grace Hawson's article for the Bittman Project. Branovan states, quote, "The problem with the term food desert is that it implies these areas and their lack of access to healthy food are somehow natural phenomena. You're also blaming the community for the fact that these things don't happen to exist in this particular community, as though the community had any control over whether those things exist," unquote. It's not the community's fault that they live within the confines of these food apartheids, but it is the fault of oppressive systematic structures that has created spaces that lack fresh food and fill these neighborhoods with highly processed food and fast food. And areas that have a high concentration of fast food and processed foods are usually referred to as food swamps. And when discussing food apartheids, you have to look at what specific neighborhoods it's directly impacting. There is no way to not look at the handling of food through the lens of race and class. People who are financially well off do not experience food apartheids. The people affected by food apartheids live in low-income communities and are more often than not, but not limited to, communities of color. Neighborhoods that are made up of Black and brown folks, as well as impoverished people, are largely impacted by food apartheid. Many studies have shown evidence that proves that this can be traced back to the 1930s, when redlining and discriminatory housing practices were used by the Federal Homeowner Lender Corporations, or the HOLC. Redlining is something that started with the housing shortage in 1933. While suburbia in the United States started to be built to provide housing to white middle class and low middle class families, people of color, specifically African Americans, were being pushed into urban housing projects. It was near impossible for African Americans to purchase houses at the cheap price they were selling for. By 1934, the Federal Housing Administration refused mortgages in and near African American neighborhoods. This is where the term redlining stemmed from. The federal government drew up maps of every metropolitan area in the country, color coding each for the Homeowner Loan Corp and the FHA. Anywhere African Americans lived was colored red to, quote, indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky to insure mortgages. It always comes back to fucking racism, bro. Always. The FHA's justification for all of this? They believe that if African Americans bought homes in or near these suburbs, the property value would decline, putting white homeowner loans at risk. But literally, that was an opposite of what happened, actually. The reality is that the property value actually went up when African Americans bought houses in white neighborhoods, since African Americans had limited choices and many more restrictions when buying a house. So, naturally, they were willing to pay more for a house than white people were. So, there's that. In 2021, Min Lee and Foxy Yoon from Western Carolina University conducted research where they laid a historical redlining map over a food environment observation map from 2010 to assess the historical context of those areas. The results prove that historically redlined neighborhoods, quote, show a higher likelihood for unhealthy retail food environments, even for census tracts with present-day economic and privileges, unquote. Hi guys, it's present day me. Don't comment on how I look because I've been editing for 2 weeks straight. But since we're on the part of the video where we're talking about redlining and food apartheids, I wanted to share a observation that I literally stumbled upon a couple weeks ago. So I work out in West LA and I told my coworker that I wanted to have a little salad. And my coworker was like, oh, you should go to Sweetgreen. And I was like, I've actually never been to Sweetgreen, but I have heard of it. And I'm sure they have good salads. Maybe if there's one on my way home, I'll pick up a salad from there. When I checked, on the map where, the closest Sweetgreen to me was, or if there was one on my way home, I noticed that there is actually no Sweetgreens on my way home, no Sweetgreens that aren't directly out of my way, and that Sweetgreen as a company, I'm not saying that they're intentionally doing this, but Sweetgreen as a company avoiding Black and brown communities and communities that are lower to middle class, which is interesting to say the least. There are literally only 5 Sweetgreens below the 10 freeway. And if you know anything about the 10 freeway, even if you're not familiar with LA, you know that one part in that Kendrick Lamar song, don't say you hate LA when you don't travel past the 10, which is honestly a crazy thought. The thought of not traveling past the 10 freeway. That's besides the point. There are only 5 Sweetgreens below the 10 freeway. And those Sweetgreens are going to be, one is in West Torrance, another one in Manhattan Beach, one's in Marina Del Rey. There's one that's barely off of the 10 freeway in Culver City. And there's also one on the USC campus. Oh, and I missed the newest Sweetgreen, which is the one in Naples in Long Beach, or second what is it? PCH in second. That's where this sweet green is. I was like, that kind of left a bitter taste in my mouth because I was like, why the would I want to go somewhere that is actively avoiding, well, okay, not actively, but that has so far avoided Black and brown neighborhoods and neighborhoods that are predominantly working class. That made me realize that there is naturally with food apartheids this disconnect that food apartheids create with the people that are struggling with the food apartheid itself. Because as soon as I saw the sweet greens are nowhere near working class communities, I was like, there better not be a sweet green coming to me anytime soon, coming to my neighborhood, because then I started worrying about what that would mean for my neighborhood. And the fact that it'd probably mean that the cost of living in my neighborhood would go up. It'd probably mean that we were in the second or third stage of gentrification. This made me realize that food apartheids are a systematic thing. Obviously, it didn't just make me realize that, but it made me realize that we cannot be reliant on outside sources like a place called Sweet Green that is clearly a chain to come in and change the neighborhood in terms of its eating habits and its availability and proximity to healthy food options. We as a community, and every community, needs to take on that challenge ourselves, because we cannot be reliant on these corporations and companies that make millions and millions, and I'm sure billions of dollars off of people eating at these places, because it'll just disrupt the community. The community needs to be reliant on itself to make these changes, and it starts with community leaders. It starts with people actively giving children the education of what healthy eating habits are. Not only children, but also adults need to learn too. I feel like I had to learn as an adult what healthy eating habits were, and that's okay. You have to start, but we cannot be reliant on these corporations to come in and guide us into eating a healthier lifestyle. Because as soon as these corporations come in and say, oh, look, you guys should be good now because you have a sweet green, a 5-minute, 10-minute walk from you, that just brings more fear and disruption to the neighborhood opposed to actual healthy eating habits. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. And that's something that I realized that I wasn't even searching for. So yeah, that's what I got to say about that. Let's go back to the video. But building more grocery stores in these neighborhoods isn't exactly going to help. There has to be planning, acknowledgement of racial policies that put limitations on folks' exposure to healthy foods. There needs to be development and structural changes to provide all neighborhoods with opportunity to improve diets and the quality of foods people are eating. These communities need livable wages and stable jobs to even be able to expand their access to fresh food. We have to start at the institutional level. Start at what Nina Sevilla calls the intersectional root. And there are organizations that are working towards those changes in varying cities across the United States. This includes the Ron Finley Project, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and the Youth Farm in North Minneapolis, which is ran by Black farmer Marcus Carr, who is using gardening and the agriculture trap to combat food apartheids. Twin Cities PBS Chance York interviewed Carr in 2022 on an episode of Outside Chance. Here, Carr explains how Youth Farm, which is a 28-year-old organization that has used food as a form of social change, has given him a chance to further the community's knowledge of food, gardening, and encouraging nutrition and home cooking. The passion that Carr has for the Youth Farm and community garden is evident, and Carr proves that urban gardening can help communities in many ways.
What would you say that community gardens can really bring to help heal the stuff that people are dealing with?
Endless possibilities, bro. It's literally medicine. You're talking about like living spaces, greener spaces, cleaner air, cleaner water, access to healthier food options, habits for people nurturing plants, cooking for their families, planning their meals today for tomorrow. but really creating our own jobs, our own possibilities. This is the purpose of urban agriculture.
What does it take to have a successful community garden?
First of all, it takes people. This is something we do as a village concept. So the more we put our hands in the dirt, the less the next person have to do.
Who'd thunk it? Literally all circles back to having to rely on one another. And not necessarily because we want to, but because we literally have to. We literally have to. Okay? We have to. Food sharing is more than just humans' natural survival instinct. We have to view it as something much bigger. Not only is it what separates us from the animal kingdom, but it's what has allowed us to build the world we see today. It gave us art, culture, music, medicine, megalithic structures, buildings, pets, loving our neighbors, the Nintendo Switch 2. Me and that Switch, man. And we did it for no other reason than realizing that our neighbors also deserve to eat with us. And we hope that they have the same sentiment about us. It's the evolved way of thinking. Compassion, altruism, being real, showing empathy is what makes us evolved, and contrary to what some loser might push people into thinking today. Food is political. It has to be seen as such since its absence is being used as a prominent strategy against innocent civilians. Withholding food or access to food is a step towards genocide. There is truly no other way to see it. Zane Swanson says, quote, evolutionarily, cooperative food sharing behaviors that extend beyond mothers and young offspring or kin groups provide populations with food security, buffering against energy shortfalls, relaxing metabolic constraints, and broadening socio-ecological possibilities, unquote. We have no other choice but to share. Especially now more than ever, since the United States government cut back on food assistance programs like SNAP, food stamps, and food banks. Eating is literally a right, not a privilege. If all of this wasn't here, if there was no government, if there was no politics, no art, no culture, no war, no DJs, no clubs, no schools, no person next to you, you'd still be able to eat. Think about that. You'd still be able to eat whatever you wanted. And I'm not saying, join a community garden, even though it can be pretty easy to join one. And there are so many resources to help you start your own little garden in your home or apartment. And I'm also not saying you should start urban foraging, even though there's an urban foragers map for literally every neighborhood around the world. And I'm not saying trade goods for services. Again, even though that is super easy to do. If anyone wants to tailor my jeans for me, I will gladly make you a roasted chicken. I don't know. Or what am I good at making? I'll gladly make you some mac and cheese. I'm really good at making mac and cheese. I mean, but that aside, even having dinner with your family, neighbors, friends, even your coworkers, if you're cool with them like that, getting together and having a potluck, sharing food and energy and social experiences can make all the difference. With a global recession looming its ugly, greedy head in the distance, I actually think we're in it. I actually think we're in the global recession as I speak. All we got is each other and the resources we can share amongst one another. The main point of all of this is don't be greedy. Don't be selfish, because it literally has never worked out for humans ever. And the fall that stems from that behavior will come soon enough for people that act that way. You can't be selfish. There's no room in the survival guide to be selfish. You won't survive if you're selfish. Just share. Just share. It's in our evolutionary history. Don't you want to be evolved? Anyway, what's your favorite food? What's something you'd bring to a potluck? Again, people usually love my mac and cheese. Shout out Grandma Jewel, because Jewel's mac and cheese hits every time. 10 out of 10. No one has ever hated it. What are some of your food sharing takes? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, that's all I got for you this time. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. If you hate it, maybe you can like and subscribe too. I don't know. That'd kind of be an interesting dynamic to play around with. But yeah, till next time. See ya. That's it. Don't you love it?